Again, probably no mysticism, just unexplored possibilities of the human body. I once had to travel from Portland to Winnipeg on business. Winter 2003, January. I don't remember the date, but I do remember that it was about 25 degrees below zero. The whole day before the trip I was up to my neck in business, exhausted as a hobo, not even enough time to eat, and I needed to go. I left Portland at about 10 p.m., had no navigator, but used the map to figure out where and how to cut in order to get there fast. I reached Lethbridge all right, without deviating from the main road, and then I started guessing the shortest routes. On the map would be fine, but in reality went to hell knows where. There are villages on the atlas, but in fact one abandonment around. And fields. By the way, before this summer I drove the same way, and really cut down. I thought that this time will be lucky. Kilometers 70 miles traveled, so somehow Shudniko became no encounter, no cafes, no gas stations. Although the road was clean, in general, I decided to turn around and go back on the main road. I think it was enough to experiment. After 10 kilometers, the light went on. We are running out of gasoline and soon the car stopped. Here, after some thought, I understand that somehow the situation is out of control, and to add to the old-fashioned Nokia connection is not getting. There were no passing cars. The time was about 1 in the morning. The prospect of freezing great. Came in the car, switched on the emergency light, had a smoke, quietly turned on the music, the heater on the air until the engine was not completely cooled, and so, apparently, dozed off. I woke up, feeling that I was driving. I looked ahead. A tractor like Belarus was pulling me along. I could even see the license plate number and the flashing of the crashes, and I remembered it, 20-38 of TRR. And the main thing was that I took it for granted and went back to sleep. I woke up from someone touching me, opened my eyes, but could not move, frozen. I see some woman shaking me and saying, "Sonny, how did you end up here?" Well, from her story, she works at a gas station. At night, she's reading a book and looking at the gas station platform. Quiet, nobody. She said she looked for 5 minutes, no one came out, and decided to check it herself. Comes to the car, and there behind the wheel of a half-frozen fainting sits, practically unresponsive to anything. She dragged me somehow to her cabin, warmed me up, gave me some hot tea. The most interesting thing, she didn't see or hear any tractor. And if some volunteer was pulling me, who was driving my car then? Well, in general, what I remembered, that I wrote. P.S. I still got frostbite on my fingers, as a little frost starts to go numb. This story is real, and it happened to me in 2007 in the Kemerovo region. I will try to summarize it briefly. I worked then in a cab in my own car. Those days were just empty. I had very few orders. I scraped together barely enough money for the daily schedule and for gasoline. The weather interfered. It was raining so hard that it was dangerous to drive by car. Visibility was zero. It poured all day, along the avenues of the river. The horror is complete. Rarely anyone needs to go anywhere. Still, I managed to make some money for the day. But since my companion and I had agreed to drink beer a few days ago, we had to go out at night, and there were almost no cabs in town. In general, the anticipation of earning was higher than spending the last and then earning again. I often took him along for the night, as there were a lot of scumbags in our town, drug addicts and simple morons. We were sitting in the car, drinking coffee, cracking jokes, and we were about to go home when suddenly, from the opposite side of the avenue, a man walked by. I could see very badly, but I could see that he was obviously drunk and walking barefoot towards us. I did not expect anything from him. Usually such people without money ask for a ride, but when this man approached the car, I was a bit taken aback. She was a well-drunk woman, with loose black hair in her 60 seconds and wearing black clothes, walking barefoot through cold and muddy puddles. Anyway, she asked me to take her to a village for 800 rubles. Of course, I was taken aback by such an amount. It was twice as cheap to get to that village. But she said something like, "The weather is bad, and you're tired." I told her jokingly, "Okay, let's go." We drove for about 40 minutes. I only knew the way approximately. I had never been in those parts. And there was such mud that it could not be called a road. Everything was washed out. The rain was pouring even harder. Bushes, trees, and precipices flashed in front of the hood. I drove, barely managing to dodge the car from collision with this monstrosity. The road was like a snake with a lot of branches and crossroads. We reached the village with difficulty. Granny paid the bill and said to go back on the same road, and disappeared into the night, slipping barefooted in the mud. Yurik and I laughed some more. It rained a little less, and Yurik asked to drive. I sometimes let him ride in the villages or on long rides, so this time we crossed and drove home. I leaned back in the passenger seat and lit a cigarette, wondering where I could better buy a beer. The music was playing loudly, and that added to the adrenaline. After about 10 minutes, Yuka suddenly stopped the car and said that the road was over. I stood up and saw there was grass in front of the headlights. I couldn't understand a thing. It was raining again, getting harder and harder, and the windows were misted over. I couldn't see anything. I opened the door a bit to get my bearings, and then the lightning came, bright and long. Honestly, I ducked a little, and behind the door I saw grave crosses, monuments, and fences. I was shocked at how we got here in the first place. I scolded Jerk a little. He was obviously offended, but I had to apologize because we really could not see the road. I should have gone back on my own, but what can I do now? So we got over, and when I tried to back up, I felt the car pull into a hole in the track and hit the back fender of someone's fence. I didn't want to scratch the car, so that back and forth with a swaying motion I tried to level it for about 20 minutes, maybe a little less, and without success. Suddenly, Yura says quietly, turn on high beam, please." And I heard him badly, as my door was ajar and I looked out the back, trying to get out, and the noise of rain. I was already all wet, and next to the car floated decorative flowers, torn by gusts of wind from the wreaths. This gives me the creeps, just like a shallow muddy river under the car. The water was almost to the door. I shut the door, turned on the high beam, and my body just felt cotton candy from what I was seeing. I was sitting there, watching as two people-like objects approached us about 20 meters away, completely black, and moving over the grass without touching it at all. The rain had just stopped a little, and I was able to see it in detail. I am a grown-up guy, but I was so scared that I thought we were going to die here right now. It was the tears that came to my eyes, and for both of us at once, or the rain from the wet head got into my eyes and stung me, like when I was a child after a grievance. Anyway, I pulled myself together as best I could, putting the car in reverse, pressed down hard on the gas pedal, not thinking at all about the consequences. After scraping the entire length of the car, we raced in reverse fairly quickly, as I was trying to see something in the mirror in flashes of lightning, catching a glimpse of some outlines of the dead road. I did not have time to notice how they were already at the hood of the car. The headlights with the high beam on didn't cut through them. They seemed to absorb the bright light, the headlights shining inside them. After a couple of seconds, the wheels of the car snagged the embankment road, and we were abruptly turned backward toward these creatures. They fell behind pretty quickly, and we drove very quickly toward town, not afraid of the huge puddles that the car might just stall from getting water in the electrics. I looked in the mirror, and you returned to the back window, and in flashes of lightning we saw those two standing hovering in the air a meter above the ground between the birches. Farther and farther away from them, we disappeared around the corner, my heart pounding so hard I was ready to jump out at any second. When we returned, we naturally bought a lot of beer and sat up until morning discussing what had happened. Even my wife asked me not to work in a cab anymore, which I ended up doing. But that night was simply incomparable to any of the most frightening and psychologically demanding movies. When I remember it to this day, my legs go numb like they did then, and I get goosebumps running down my spine, especially when I realize they saw us too. I didn't embellish a word of it, and there's no point. I'm not going to compete with anyone here. There's a lot I haven't finished. It's just creepy to remember these details. Yes, and you do not need them. Read Too Lazy. Well, take care of yourself. This story is completely real and was told to me in the first person. A truck driver living in Europe worked as a delivery driver mostly in Belgium, Holland, and France. Interesting stories happen to truckers in general. The road is not an easy place. In the French town of Dunkirk, a driver took a cargo to one of the port warehouses, of which there were just cities built, and stopped for a 10-hour rest. In Europe, this is strict. the driver is obliged to drive and rest, which is marked with a special device, which the police have the right to check at any time. After a good night's rest and a good night's sleep, the driver left Dunkirk for Ostend, on the coast of the North Sea in Belgium. It's easy to look up the route on Google Maps. Another detail is that the boss of the firm where the driver worked required the chauffeurs, if possible, to choose country roads and avoid autobahns, because on the autobahns trucks are charged a substantial fee. A special device registers the truck's movements and the company receives a bill. So the driver drove along the coast from Dunkirk to Ostend through the villages on country roads. It was practically nighttime, but the driver felt fine. It was a short drive, the road was familiar, and the port warehouse in Ostend was open round the clock, so he expected to receive a new load soon and be on his way home. And then a strange thing began to happen. The familiar road changed its appearance. Instead of asphalt, there were paving stones under the wheels. The headlights illuminated it well. Along the road there were tall trees instead of the usual neatly trimmed shrubbery. Something I've gone the wrong way, thought the chauffeur and looked at the navigator. The navigator malfunctioned, and then the driver began to fall asleep abruptly, just passed out. It was some kind of unnatural, viscous drowsiness, almost unconsciousness. The car began to work wonders. It was dragged around a curve where the paved road went to the right between trees, and then it picked up speed all by itself. The chauffeur told me that he could hardly control the car, slowing it down and keeping it from turning onto dubious trails. So, the horror continued. There are enough small settlements in this direction. Passing through them, the chauffeur could clearly see people in the streets, singly and in groups, with baby carriages. As they approached, these silhouettes melted and disappeared. Driving through a couple of such settlements, constantly reducing the speed, which was increasing by itself, the driver noticed something white on the passenger seat with his side vision. Already coaxing himself, he thought, probably did not put away the towel. My brain always clings to rational explanations. But I turned my head and there came the apotheosis of the horror of the night. A white woman's head was peeping out of the car window on the passenger side. A woman's head, he explained, because her long white hair was fluttering as the car went by. She had a face, eyes and mouth in a smile or smirk. How I didn't pass out, I don't know, he recounted. I started remembering the prayer, but my head was all jumbled up, like it was foggy. Suddenly it was over. My mind was clear. The dream was gone. The road took on its usual appearance. There was asphalt under the wheels. Ahead of him shone the lights of Ostend. He never drove on that road again. At first he ignored the chief's demands and drove along the autobahn, and then he switched to other directions. What he wondered most was where he would have ended up if he had turned off that road after all.